So I wanted to start just by stepping back for a minute and talking about how we got here. We all know that patients are hard to find, and it's possible, people could say, well, they've always been hard to find. But in fact, I think it's pretty clear to anybody operating in the field that it's much more difficult to find them now. Next slide, please. And the question is, what's the situation that we're in now, right? So first of all, I remember years ago now when I was on the pharmaceutical sponsor side, we talked about it looks like there are no more blockbusters. So when you had an antibiotic that had a broad coverage, it wasn't hard to find patients. And as you go away from blockbusters, you get into more specific populations of patients that you're looking for. As the clinical conditions get more complex, that begins to wean down your population as well. And then, of course, we have growing regulations. They rarely go backwards. So you've got more stringent controls, and you've got an attempt to make sure that that drug has enough population so that you can find a statistical difference. So you put these things together, you put together the fact that it continues to be expensive to run a trial anyway, and also the fact that you're trying to sort of split your attention sometimes between how could we use real-world evidence, how can we turn real-world data into real-world evidence, and put together a trial. And as you say, with a spreadsheet, the cells get empty very fast. In other words, there are very few patients theoretically that even match that. So I think that the situation that we're in now is acute, and it's not just the same thing that we've always had. It's actually more difficult because you've got pressures coming from both sides in terms of the type of things you need to satisfy in order to get regulatory approval, and then the fact that the clinical condition you're after and you're testing are more specific, so fewer patients in general have that. So and on top of all that, it's clear then as it goes forward, there's more competition for those same patients as more sponsors are putting out more drugs. And that puts us in a situation now where, okay, patients are hard to find, and great, we can scale. Next slide, please. So an obvious sort of knee-jerk solution to it is that we can if we scale more patients, then we can find more patients. The question is, how is that situation different than it was before? And I think the key difference now that allows us to actually have a possible solution to this is the digitization of healthcare data. And it's clear that finally, in a sense, data is driving innovation in regulated clinical trials. It's been true in the other industries, in publishing and music and banking. It's finally come into healthcare. And honestly, I think that FDA, although, if you're a dyed in the wool sponsor advocate, you would have been surprised 10 years ago, but FDA probably has driven more innovation in this area than anybody else because they've changed the regs in order to accommodate the changes in healthcare digitization of data. So with the onset of requiring the use of EHRs and the sort of rules that ONC has been putting out with data sharing and the standards that have been evolving there, we now are at the point where we can have the ability to scale data, and it exists. But the question is it enough just to get the numbers? So in other words, we can find very large sources of patient data, as Faith was saying, in EHRs. And in fact, that's what she was alluding to it earlier. Through Eligo, for example, we have our own network. We have a partnership with Cerner to get lives. We have a partnership with Ascension Health to get lives. We have a partnership with Harris Computers to get lives. And so the question is, well, you have that scale now. Is that enough? Next slide, please. And in fact, we've been talking about this for quite a while, and the short answer is no, it's not enough. And I think that it is completely parallel to the problem that when you look at what happened with electricity, we had electricity around sort of available for 10 to 15 years before you saw increases in productivity. And when you look at the factory floor for a typical production plant using a steam generator, they had a giant cylinder running down the middle of it. Everybody was connected with this giant rubber bands, basically, running the machines. Electricity started to improve productivity when guys realized if we change around the factory floor and remove all that, we can have a little electric motors at every spot. We can change the flow of things. We can put like things together. And you start to see an increase in productivity. And so it's what I call basically just changing the factory floor.